Sony have stopped making PlayStation VR 2s. This is a whole news story doing the rounds. The source for this is apparently a bit unreliable, but there's so many people are going with this that it's worth covering anyway, especially in regards to the wider context of PlayStation VR 2 and the fact that it hasn't necessarily caught on anywhere near as much as Sony assumedly would like it to, and the likes of Horizon Call of the Mountain didn't really seem to move the needle. Yeah. I literally only know you that has a PSVR 2, whereas I do know a lot more people who have Oculuses, but I still feel like the conversation on VR is still this weird sort of I was going to say dynamite conversation, but what's the opposite of that? Like the Marmite conversation.
Yeah, the Marmite conversation.
It's just that you're either totally in or you just don't care.
Yeah, the bean sandwich conversation, some might
of
say.
1908.
Absolutely. Yeah. The PSVR thing, like, it's tough. It is really difficult, and Sony was always fighting an uphill battle. But to see this article come out, which is on Bloomberg, but not by Jason Schreier. It's by another writer who's commented on VR stuff in the past. Like, they claim that Sony made 2 million products of the PlayStation VR 2 and is now stopping that completely because it didn't sell that many, so they're just trying to shift the stock that they actually have. And I believe it, man. I really do, because you see I think the writing has been on the wall since Sony committed to those layoffs a few weeks ago, because the studios they were closing down completely were studios like London studios like Firesprite, these teams that have worked. I mean, they literally shut down the studio that shipped the Horizon game, Horizon Call of the Mountain, that you mentioned. Their one big first-party PSVR 2 experience. The team that made that has now been gutted.
Didn't they do Blood and Truth as well?
That was London studio, I think. I don't think that was who did Call of the Mountain, but yes, they also shut down London studio, who did Blood and Truth and who was working on the PlayStation VR before then. And yeah, they've helped to produce VR exclusives like Resident Evil 8 and Resident Evil 4, which are exceptional. But as someone who owns a PlayStation VR 2 and has spent all of that money on it, like, I think it's an amazing product, but the games and the support just aren't there at all on Sony's side. And when I'm there with this piece of kit that I forked out for on the promise of getting, a Half-Life Alex killer from Sony, and when that doesn't arrive, and it doesn't seem like they're even committed to focusing on VR in the future, it's like, well, I've been mugged off there. I can champion this as much as I want. I'm having a lot of fun with it. But if I knew this was only going to last 2 years with real dedicated support, less than 2 years with real dedicated support, I'd have bought it at a discount. Those games would have been still there, because a lot of them are like third-party games from years ago anyway. Great ones that I haven't played, but third-party games from years ago. And I could have just got this whole experience cheaper. Like, as an early adopter, I feel mugged off.
I feel like they've done this twice in a row. Like, I feel like the PSVR 1 felt like this MacGyver thrown together, cobbled together thing where it's like, okay, we have the PlayStation motion remotes from back when we were trying to compete with the Kinect. Let's have them be the controllers, and then we'll have this really dialed back budget VR experience to test the waters. And then I never really felt like they had any like must play stuff over there, even though there were the likes of Blood and Truth. I remember the Rick and Morty game doing the rounds back when the first few seasons of the show were blowing up. Like, there were talking points of like, you should see this on PSVR. And I remember when No Man's Sky dropped, and it was like, this is like full intergalactic VR. You can just live in this space. That's so cool. And then I just felt like it just kind of cooled overall. I felt like they didn't figure out the marketing. I don't feel like they found out a way to convince people that they should try things in VR. They tried the Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man cam, where it's just like the shot of you in the experience. Yeah. But to me, they never really got it out there. And maybe it's just the reality of physical video games going away so much. Like, so many people just buy digital. They're not in video game stores anymore. There's age bracket stuff where like maybe a bunch of teens would have cared, kind of thing, if they got the demos out there and you could try things and whatever. There's the cleanliness side of it, where no one really wants to try a headset that 20 other kids have just had. They never figured that out, and I think that was an issue. There was never buzz around VR. Like, there was within the circles who were already up for it, but they never convinced the masses that it was worth it. And then, so to me, it felt like they abandoned PSVR 1 after Blood and Truth and things like that. And then to me, it's all happening again. It was like, we've got Horizon, guys, and we've got like worthwhile things to look at. Are you going to convince me they're worth it? No? Okay, cool. I'm going to be over here if you guys ever figure this out, and now you haven't. They
do need a Half-Life Alex, because I don't know how you feel about that game, but I felt that was the one VR game that really cut through just VR circles. Like, it was talked about as a Game of the Year contender across the board for that year. It might not have made you go out and buy, I can't remember what platform it released on, Valve's VR headset. But it got you talking about the game. It got you talking about, suddenly, is this the future of the medium? Like, if Valve are doing things with Half-Life in VR they couldn't do on a regular flat screen, should we pay more attention to it? Across PlayStation VR 1 and across PlayStation VR 2, Sony just hasn't had that killer rap from a first-party perspective. Don't get me wrong, they have some of the best games I have ever played on the PlayStation VR 2. No joke, when I'm playing stuff like Pistol Whip, when I'm playing stuff like Pavlov, when I'm playing stuff like Saints and Sinners 2, when I'm improvising my way around this open-world, zombie-infested apocalypse, I feel like a kid again. I feel like I'm having brand new, unique gaming experiences that I wouldn't otherwise get. But the issue there is you can get every single game I just mentioned on other VR platforms, much cheaper in some cases, VR platforms. And a lot of those games, they're old anyway. Like Pavlov, I think, first released in 2017. And it got a big update for the PlayStation VR 2 with the switch to Unreal Engine 5. But that game is something people have experienced for years at this point. And while that can support a device like the PlayStation VR 2, it can't allow it to pierce the mainstream and convince people to buy that specifically. Because you're not just buying the headset, you need to buy a PlayStation 5 alongside it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
You need to drop 400 quid on a PlayStation 5 and then drop 500 quid on a PSVR 2, and then suddenly that price is like outrageous, especially when you're only buying it to play games that you can get on an Oculus Quest 2 that you can just chuck on your head and then have a good time with.
Yeah, the PSVR 2 still had all the cable issues. Like it wasn't this like sleek, just grab it whenever you want, put it on. Like the way that VR works in movies or in sci-fi, where you just put it on and it renders and it works. Like I feel like that was the VR dream that PSVR couldn't get there with. But yeah, the game side of it though as well, like, you've forked out the money, right, let's do this. I've forked out almost £1,000 on this thing. Let's sit down and do it. And then you're playing what should be the best experience possible, Horizon Call of the Mountain. It's the first party endorsed thing. And I remember when we were talking about Horizon, you just saying like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine. It's another first person showcase where it's like, look, like, I mean, Horizon has climbing segments. There's obviously the bow and arrow stuff. It's nice and responsive, but it didn't feel like anything that you couldn't do in a first person shooter or that was already being done in the first person space.
Yeah.
To me, I always thought that VR needed experiences that when you see them as someone who didn't care about VR, you would be like, I need to play that. Because if there's anything in the AAA space or in the regular gaming space that stands out, it's stale, overused mechanics. And I remember the first time on the original PSVR when I was playing the Until Dawn spin-off, Rising Blood or whatever it's called.
Russia Blood.
There was one bit where there was two waves of like zombies coming at me from opposite sides, and I was looking both ways, shooting them both like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I fundamentally couldn't do that.
Yes.
To pan around properly and actually aim properly, and remember where my hand was, and then measure all that space in real time. That was the only thing that like got me where I was like, that's actually something that you can't do before, and I need VR for that. And I needed infinitely more experiences like that. And I know they're out there based on what you've described, but I don't feel like they've communicated them, showcased them, hung the tech on them. They're there if you buy in, but you've got to buy in to find them.
That's it, right? And I think it's between a rock and a hard place, because for me, VR's biggest strength is refreshing what would otherwise be a set of pretty boilerplate mechanics. Like if I just described The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners to you, it would sound like the most boring, overdone game you've ever played. Like a survival zombie game where you go out, you kill zombies, you bring your gear back. But when you get the tactility of virtual reality, like it just elevates those kind of seemingly basic sets of mechanics, because suddenly it's more in the moment, it's more immersive.
Like you're holding the guy and hitting him.
It's literally, it's more physically exerting to have to manage all these things, look over your shoulder to see zombies like rushing you and like trying to climb away from them and stuff like that, trying to hide. Like it just elevates them so much. But unless you've actually experienced it, you can't really sell someone on that, because it's so vague, and you even now when I describe it to you, you're probably thinking of a slightly different game than it even is in the moment, and that's like almost impossible, and it's certainly impossible at a nearly £1,000 price point, and that is a shame, because like I said, I love all of those games and I want VR to succeed. I genuinely think it could be the future of the medium, but I can totally see why it's not been widely adopted, and I can totally see Sony canning proper support for it going
Yeah,
forward.
you would have to relentlessly prove that it is worth it. Go on all that future of the medium stuff. Otherwise, to me, it default felt like when 3D was the future of film. And I just went like, I doubt it, but I'll watch your 3D movie. Okay, it looks a bit naff, it's a bit blurry, whatever. I don't buy you anymore. But if they kept going and going and going, like maybe eventually they would have had some sort of movie experience that would have been fundamentally enhanced by being in 3D. The VR thing, a huge elephant in the room with VR is the physical side of it. Like I don't want to game standing up, running around my living room. I don't want to do that. I don't like the shutting off the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I know people do because it's full 100% immersion. And I do a version of that with headphones on and I'm playing games and stuff. But I do think that the literal reality of just, that's not how I want to game is maybe far more of the majority than Sony ever thought it was.
Absolutely. I mean, I would almost compare it to people who own a racing wheel. And that is another kind of similar commitment, I would say, where racing wheels are awesome. They undoubtedly make racing games better, but it's an investment. A lot of them are quite expensive, and you need the space to have a racing wheel with a chair in the setup for that, right? And it is, I think, VR is, I would say, a little bit more accessible. A lot of the headsets are wireless right now, and we were talking about the wire issues with VR too. To me, that's not a problem. It's one wire that kind of plugs straight into the PlayStation, and then you're suddenly good to go. I would say that, again, it's something I have to sell you on, right? Because it's not necessarily being marketed correctly, but I would say there are so many experiences on the platform that don't require much from you physically at all. Like Gran Turismo, if you want to play that in VR, it's literally you sit on the couch, you put the VR headset
Wipeout
on.
VR rules.
You play with the controller. Like even if you're bringing in the actual hand controllers, the I can't remember what they're called, like DualSense VR, whatever it is. Like you can play a lot of games sat down. Like I play Saints and Sinners sat down a lot of the time. I played Resident Evil 8 sat down. I think sometimes those games can benefit from standing up, but not everything is this kind of full body, full motion, physically exerting thing. But again, it's a hard
that's
sell
on them
people
to
because
sell.
the stereotype of VR is like is the guy in like a massive living room and he's like fighting dragons over here and he's running around. It's physically exerting, and that there are experiences that mimic that and accurately reflect that, but it's not necessarily everything, and it is much more convenient, I think, than it probably looks from the outside.
Well, that's the thing, because I feel like VR marketing 101 is mark out your safe zone, look at this guy in his living room or in a big open space, which is a whole thing for a lot of people who might not even have the space. I don't in my house. I can move stuff around, but I'm not going to change my room every time I want to do something. I think that's a whole thing. And just, that reality of like, it's not as easy as just picking up a DualSense and it connects and it works. I have to go and plug it in, I have to disconnect it again. It's tiny things, but I think they get in the way of the usability of it.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, like there are experiences that are cool to just sit down and take in, but it doesn't feel like they're front and center. Like if you had marketing that mimicked the way the Switch was introduced, where it was like, okay, here it is as a home console, the guys picked it up and now it's handheld and whatever. I remember even then Nintendo were like, and also you can use the stand to stand it there and use it that way. Like they were like 3 ways to play was the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like VR marketing should be like, it enhances everything. Like, here it is on a big space. You're also sitting down, like you're doing whatever. They never got that across. Like this VR as a medium hasn't got that across.
No, not at all. And it's a shame because the games themselves do such a good job of catering to a bunch of different play styles. Like every game now more or less will have a standing or sitting mode unless it's something that specifically requires standing. I know Pavlov is standing only, for instance, but like they have all of these options to like help you and to make the thing more accessible. Like
eye tracking as well?
Yeah, eye tracking and completely tweak the way your movement works in so many games to kind of reduce motion sickness or to make you more comfortable. Like
it's a whole other thing as well, motion sickness.
So much work has been put into the comfortability side of it that just kind of hasn't been reflected in the marketing. And it might be impossible to reflect that because you need that hands-on experience. But I almost think, in a way, it was a shame that I love the PSVR 1, but it's almost a shame that to many people, that is what VR gaming is. I remember when we did a video on the channel where we played Resident Evil 4 VR.
Yes.
And I remember you were impressed by the manual reloading, like actually knocking in the clip and pulling the slide back. And I remember thinking in the moment, like, it's such a shame that to you that's novel because that was stuff that was happening like a decade ago. But
just not on the PSVR.
But that obviously hasn't been conveyed. Like, it was in the PSVR, but it was like the later games, you know what I mean?
Right,
that kind of required a bit more functionality. And it's like, oh, it's a shame because that to you is so new, but that to me now is like almost an old hat to be expected mechanic. And it's like, I think a lot of people's preconceptions of what VR is based on that kind of PlayStation VR 1's rudimentary approach to it, because like you said, great piece of kit for the price at the time, I think, but it was hobbled together. It didn't have the controllers that were built for that purpose. And now you actually have a machine that does all of that well, but people are like, well, it had all these issues before, and I kind of don't really want to jump in that price. And I think that's valid.
They should have launched, if this was the original PSVR and it didn't launch alongside a new console, like you can argue the pandemic's an issue as well, it probably is, but you're asking people to fork out for a new system. They're rare anyway, so they're hard to get a hold of, and then you need to double up and get the VR. If this was a mid-generation piece of kit, if this was instead of a PlayStation 4 Pro a few years ago or whatever, instead of just a step up for the base system, I think it would do a hell of a lot better.
Yeah.
If the tech itself was in a better place like it is now, then you've got a whole market who are just like, what's the next thing? Oh, it's this? Cool.
Yeah.
And then also you need to pair that with like having a steady rollout of releases, and people are ready for the next thing. Like I said, my whole thing with the industry is that we're not even hitting the base level of stuff anymore.
No, I mean, we talked about when we mentioned the PlayStation 5 Pro that's like, well, I said it's like a, look, I don't want to lump you in with my opinion,
Bring
Scott
it
Telford. I said it's like, that's a pure luxury product, right? And that's what PSVR 2 feels like in the current economic climate, with console sales kind of stagnating a little bit. Like, it's an impossible sell almost to get people to fork out that much money for a piece of, let's face it, experimental technology